What's going on, everyone? John Matrix here. Hope you're all having yourselves a wonderful day wherever you're at and whenever you're watching this. It's been about a week since I've been able to sit down and get any videos done. Had some personal stuff come up, including a tooth infection, which finally I've been able to get under control. It was pretty difficult to talk, but as you can see, able to sit and talk now. So looking forward to getting back in here and finishing up the story of Fratricide here with the Exploring series. We're going to be doing chapter 4, the finale here. So yeah, links will be down below as always in the description to the original video without my commentary interaction from the Exploring series and to the Exploring series channel. So please do me a favor. If you enjoy this video, be sure to go over there and give it a like and hit that sub button on his channel if you enjoy the man's content. He definitely deserves it. Makes a lot of great content for the SCP universe as well as plenty of others, so please do me a favor, look around his channel, see all the stuff he's got in there, and yeah, give him some love. When last we left off, the General Belieth, I believe is what her name is if I can remember correctly, had gone back to Amoni, was speaking with the prince. Through a couple of different conversations, she finally kind of dropped to him what's going on with the brother and how bad he is. They had kind of a tense conversation. He ended up needing some kind of alone time and thinking about it. We had a couple scenes with him, one in particular where he ends up finding his mother drunk, and she kind of shatters this childhood image that he had of his family and his father, where, you know, his father apparently was not a very good person. And he was very abusive to his mother to the point of, you know, even doing some kind of torture. As was indicated that one of her fingers that had been replaced with a prosthetic. She had mentioned something along the lines of not all prosthetics are from signs of devotion, something along those lines. So indicating that, yeah, daddy was not good. And then that led into memories of, you know, his older brother and him being abusive, etc. So turns out, you know, he's kind of on her side, willing to help out as long as nothing happens to her brother or his brother. And of course, she is kind of essentially lying to him, as they have a plot to, you know, poison him and assassinate him. However, the other side of that thread is that it's been hinted at that he's been working at that memory or consciousness download technology in order to try to make it available for everyone. So I feel like it's going to be a situation where he ends up being the one that kind of perfects it and ends up downloading the original Bumari's consciousness into his brother, and that ends up that, you know, starting that whole chain of events where, you know, the next one in line becomes essentially the vessel for Bumari, kind of a thing. So I think that's where it's going to end up going towards. And then it ended where they're seemingly going to have to push their timetable up to go after the older brother, as he has discovered a way to get into Tanbarat and past the walls of the Davites by essentially torturing and murdering a slave of the Davites. And it essentially ended with Belieth finding the boy's body out just in the field, being rained on, you know, dumped like trash, along with her men, who had been left there after the decimation. So indicating that the older prince Kabar, or I think it's what his name is, Kabar, if I remember right, indicating that the lives of his men are no different than the lives of his enemy. He doesn't care anything about them. They're a means to an end. Yeah, so that's what I remember from the last episode. So moving forward here, I am eager to see how things are going to conclude. So yeah, looking forward to getting into this. So let's just jump on into it here. So again, this is going to be chapter 4, the finale of Fratricide, from the Exploring series. I will I still need to put part 3 up, and so I'll put part 3 and this up individually, and then I'll put them all together in one long video as well, so you guys can watch it all in one very long video if you want to. But yeah, with all it said, I'll show them in the video here. As soon as the monitor will show up, there it is. Volume's up. Let's go.
Chapter 4. Aram's words proved prophetic. Tambarat's walls fell a week later. She was in the air the evening it happened, soaring high above the city, scouting it out. The sound was deafening, nearly knocking her out of the air, and when she regained control, she banked and laid her eyes on what they had been sat waiting nearly a year for, the southern wall of Tambarat, lying blown apart and aflame from a single well-placed artillery shot that had hit a reserve of flammable oil within, as if they had known exactly where it was.
Sounds like a pretty bad flaw to like store. I mean, I guess, you know, you gotta store something kind of close to the front lines, but you want to make sure that something like that doesn't happen, right? You know, but anyway, let's continue.
The city lay like a wounded animal on its side, soft flank entirely exposed. The cathartic scream she let out was only heard by the birds, and then they too were gone, left behind as she dived towards the city. Flood of mechanite soldiers underneath her charging through the gap in the wall, following their commander screaming into the maw of hell. Tambarat stood in the space between two rivers, due far north of Mamjul. Whoever controlled the city controlled the rivers, and whoever controlled the rivers could move troops closer to the Deva capital than anyone had ever come before. And so the Deva had been the first to conquer it so many centuries ago, and it had stood as a bastion of protection for their traders and farmers and wandering ascetics since. Man-made cuttings from the rivers flowed through the city itself, bringing fresh water under the walls. Tambarat fell in the space between two rivers, forced to kneel after a year of siege by the Golden Legion. For 5 days and 5 nights they looted the city, taking with them its priceless treasures, and no prisoners.
I wonder what exactly those treasures would be, right? Like, what of value would the Davites have in there that would be of value to the Mechanites, right? Like, I mean, I guess food resources obviously be something, but beyond that, like, I don't know what kind of material wealth they're, I mean, I guess they do, right? Because they kind of talked about Belieth's, you know, one of her apartments, I guess, or her home or whatever, and how it was decorated at one point. So I guess they do, like, I still in my mind have this idea of, like, the Mechanites having kind of a more sparse, Spartan-esque kind of living where they only really have, I guess, what they need to sustain them. You know, they don't have necessarily as much material attachment, but it's not the case in this story, you know. So I guess, yeah, trophies, any kind of other material stuff, but, you know, like metals, things like that, because all their stuff's made from like Falad. So but yeah, I would just be curious to know, like, what exactly of value would the Mechanites see as value? What would the Mechanites see as value to loot, essentially, is what I'm trying to get at.
The Deva ran routed, the swords of the Legion falling on them without mercy. The symphony of artillery was replaced by screaming until the last Deva priestess died, and
It also makes me wonder, right? Like, in the first part of Red Tape, you know, with the Monoram, we heard about the Colossi, you know, these massive, you know, Fulad construct golem things that are hundreds of feet tall that can essentially take out armies on their own, right? Like, would they not be able to just use one of those to siege the city itself and break through the wall? Or maybe they have, and maybe just the magic that the Davites has is too strong. But you would think that if an artillery shot, you know, at the right place to, you know, exploit essentially, you know, ammunition stores or whatever, that to break open the wall. I don't know. But maybe this is a situation where they don't have those constructs invented yet, because they haven't really been mentioned in this fratricide part.
The commander sank to her knees, washing her face in the river running red with blood, asking a silent goddess for forgiveness for what she had done, what she had yet to do. Biliath was in a room in the citadel, smooth stone walls packed with priceless artworks and gems, probably the bedchambers of some priestess or governor. There was a bloody stain on the mattress, but she tried not to look at it. She turned as one of the soldiers stuck his head through the doorway, panting, and called out to her. He informs her that Prince Kabar is demanding to address the officers. She asks where Haram is, but he doesn't know, as Kabar asked for her. Biliath nodded, following after him. They marched quickly through the citadel. It had the heavy gray stone construction the Deva loved, interspersed with thick vines as hard as any foulad.
The other thing I forgot to mention at the end of the last episode, during that whole part where she found out that the prince was torturing someone, he kind of made a display to essentially check her for like where her loyalties are. And she kind of gave away the position that she was ready to attack him. So I wonder if that's going to come up here, if he like really paid attention to that. And now that they've sieged this, if he's going to keep her close, or how he's going to react to that, essentially, if at all.
Most of it had been looted, but they had yet to install their own command structure inside to hold the city. Haram would be in charge, no doubt. The soldiers were already calling it his victory, his achievement, which she was fine with. There was no arguing that he'd given up the most to ensure this victory. That it would go next to his name in the histories felt like adequate payment. His first command would be rebuilding the shattered wall, of course, but she would get to that once she saw what petulant demand Kabar was. Her stomach dropped when she saw him, in the central courtyard surrounded by the Imperial Guard and crowds of muttering soldiers, with a figure bound and kneeling next to him. Haram. Kabar clapped as she approached, and she asked what this was. He drew his blade and pointed it at Haram, stating that this is a traitor. Biliath narrowed her eyes and asked what he was talking about. Kabar waved his blade in the air as he spoke, explaining that for the past 3 months, General Haram has had contacts inside the walls of Tambarat, feeding them knowledge of where their forces would strike, and when, so that they could be more easily repelled. The muttering from the soldiers increased in intensity.
If that's true, it would make sense, right? Because he's trying to keep the prince from being able to take this victory and the glory from this, because as soon as this is over, essentially, and they take this, he's going back home to take the throne, right? And so he's trying to stall that out as long as possible. So there would be some kind of logic to that.
And Kabar continued. He states that Haram has done this because he lost faith in their strength. He began to believe that Tambarat's walls would not fall, that they would eventually be exhausted and forced to slink back to Amoni Ram with their tails between their legs, and was buying his own position high in the upper echelons of the Deva. He calls him a most vile kind of traitor, that who would sell out his own troops for his own neck. He draped the tip of the blade gently across Haram's throat. That was impossible, as Haram's plan rested entirely on Tambarat falling in the next week. It made no sense that he would have been cooperating with the Deva, and staring at Kabar's golden eyes, she could see that even he did not believe what he was saying.
Yeah, I kind of figured as much that would be the case. I mean, he lied about the kid being an assassin, so it makes sense.
Haram spat, telling Kabar that he remains as stupid as he is barbaric, and the flat of the blade came around, striking him in the back of the head. He tells Haram to be quiet, as he has given up the lives of countless men to secure his own legacy. With a sinking...
See, I feel like with already what's happened with the decimation and the fact that he's been essentially just throwing numbers at this wall with no regard, I feel like this would be a really bad play for him in general, right? Because the men are already turning against him, you know? So I feel like doing this in such a manner would only drive them further away from him.
Keen feeling in her stomach, Biliath realized they had both made a crucial error. They had underestimated their quarry. They had taken Kabar for an impatient fool, unskilled in the arts of war, only capable of the most direct, brutish charges. That he didn't notice or care about the massive loss of life he was absorbing, and assumed himself insulated from any consequences. But now, looking at his golden eyes relishing in Haram's misery, she could see they had been fatally incorrect. This was it, the masterstroke. In one fell swoop, Kabar had assured his legacy.
Yeah, he's gonna essentially write the history books that the reason why it took so long for him to take this was because of a traitor. So the Mechanite history will see that, you know, he despite all odds and despite a traitor in his midst feeding the enemy information that forced them to, you know, lose so many more men and yada yada, and it took so much longer than anticipated. With overwhelming odds, he was still able to achieve victory, kind of a thing.
The siege had taken so long and been so catastrophic because of a single traitorous general, not because of the prince. His strongest political enemy was to be executed in the manner of traitors, securing his command and rule. Haram's name would be stricken from the record, the victory of Tambarat being attributed to Crown Prince Kabar instead. And the no quarter order meant that not a single Deva was left alive to gainsay the accusation.
Of course.
The dog had been...
I mean, even if it came to a trial, right? Like, would any, you know, if they brought a Davite in, would their word really hold up at all and have any kind of meaning in any kind of court of law that the Mechanites would have, you know? Probably not.
Hunting them too, she realized. And they had wandered blindly into his trap. Her throat tightened, and her hand fell on the grip of her sword, taking a step forward. Then she stopped at the slight, almost imperceptible shake of Haram's head. Invisible, unless she had been looking for it. He matched her gaze. No, you cannot allow yourself to be found out. She suppressed the urge, but Kabar noticed the step, asking if she's eager for justice. He tells her that she'll have her chance, but for now, he asks Haram if he has anything to say in his defense. Haram raised his head. Even now, kneeling, he had a strong, proud air about him. This was a man of honor, and Kabar's pitiful attempts to bring him low could not rob that from him. Haram states that his accusations are false, meant only to pad himself as the taker of Tambarat.
Yeah.
Kill him if he wants, if it brings his rotten soul some momentary peace. He cannot change reality, that he is a stupid child, and the blood shed here drenches his hands, not Haram's. The foot came around from the left, kicking Haram in the jaw and sending him sprawling. Kabar says that he will not be condescended to by a traitor. He finds him guilty of high treason, and he will be executed in the manner of traitors. He looked around before saying that this is no court of rubies, but it will have to do. Biliath never saw a flash of fear cross Haram's eyes, not even for a second. He never dropped his gaze, not as Kabar stepped away and 4 members of the Imperial Guard approached, one grasping each limb and raising him into the air. Even as he screamed, shrieking as the connection between flesh and metal gave way, blood leaking from the gaps between his stumps and his prosthetics, and his soldiers pushed forward against the line of Imperial Guardsmen, shouting. Even as his screaming was replaced by the screaming of metal as the foulade gave way, limbs shearing off, and blood spraying onto the stone as he fell to the ground, writhing in agony, his screams rising over the shouting from his officers. Every movement sprayed more ruby-red blood onto the ground, mixing with the leaking oil from his prosthetics, a pool of fluids to die in. Then Kabar's voice rose over his agonized screaming, telling him that he will lie here, taking hours to die. Or he would, if Kabar were not an honorable master. In respect to his years of service, he will grant one mercy, a quick death. Then he turned to Biliath, telling her to cut his throat and put an end to his traitorous life.
This is the test of loyalty that I was talking about that I figured was going to be coming. So, yeah, she's going to have to now kill a trusted friend, potentially a mentor, right? You know, of hers, so.
He froze. Haram was still screaming, writhing limbless on the ground, dying. It was over for him. He'd lost too much blood already. He would not survive this.
As terrible of a situation as that would be in, right? Like, if I were Biliath, I would do it just because, like he just said there, like, he's already dead. There's no saving him at this point, you know? So it's better to enact that mercy, essentially, and help him end his life, end his suffering, you know? Like I said, though, in one of the previous videos, it's interesting how, with all their advanced technology, they still have the Mechanites, that is, with all their advanced technology, they still have the worst parts of humanity in them, you know, with this kind of brutal execution.
A quick death was indeed the only mercy she could grant him now. You cannot allow yourself to be found out. And so, all her officers staring, she choked down the bitter, incandescent rage at this monster, this wretch, and nodded, taking a shaky step forward, hand drawing a dagger from her belt loop. The same dagger she had thought about cutting Haram with so many weeks ago, but now he was not threatening her. His eyes were matching her gaze, somehow cutting through the unimaginable pain. She approached, kneeling gently, as he gurgled, throat filling with his own blood. For the living and the dead, never again. She placed the edge of the knife against his throat. Kabar announced for Haram to state his last words, and Haram said them so softly, so quietly, that only Biliath, cradling his head in her lap, could have heard him. He said simply that he dies for his empire, and she dragged the knife across his throat while she held his head, safe like a lamb, and eventually he stopped moving, proud nose up, no honor behind those eyes, nothing at all.
Man was a patriot.
She let Haram's head drop to the stones. Kabar approached from behind. She didn't have to restrain herself from cutting his throat out. Her muscles were too exhausted to raise herself up. His fingers teased her hair, and he tells her to fly back to Amoni Ram and tell them of her master's victory and to prepare for his return. He will re-enter not as a prince, but as an emperor. She felt herself nodding dimly, then rising to her feet, stumbling back into the citadel, into the room she had taken as hers. Pulling the box from under a shelf, unclasping it, removing Ansul's memory machine, now clicking and whirring and functioning perfectly. She set it down on the stone slab and placed her fingers into the slots, and thought of Haram. The walls of Amoni Ram held 4 gates, one in every cardinal direction, each as tall.
So I wonder, like, could that work with essentially a dead body? Could she, like, essentially hook that up to Haram, save his memories, and then put it in another body, right?
Tall as 20 men.
That would be an interesting twist, right? If the memories that's getting passed down are actually Haram and not one of the Bromaros.
Were as strong and thick as the walls that held them, capable of being barred with hydraulic locks in case the city were ever besieged. But of course, that was impossible, because the enemy would never reach Amoni Ram. The eastern gate was gargantuan. Moving it by hand was an impossibility, and so it relied on a huge mechanical coil and pulley that inched back agonizingly slowly, pulling the huge doors apart while Ansul watched. When the gap was wide enough to fit several men, he advanced, Imperial Guard forming a protective diamond around him. There was an organized force waiting outside the gates, stretching far back, and with one person at its head. All the caution in his form evaporated upon seeing who led the formation. He ordered his guard back, rushing ahead into the cool night. He called out to Biliath, who sank into a kneel, and he remarked on her returning early, hopefully with good news. He looked around her unit, a relatively small force, just a few hundred troops, some of them mounted, surrounding the train of some 15 land crossers, the wide, many-legged cargo vessels. They weren't in marching formation, he realized. There was a pattern to their positioning, but not one he knew. Biliath's voice was flat and emotionless as she responded, telling him that Tambarat has fallen, and they've occupied the city in the name of the Emperor. Ansul felt a knot in his shoulder relax as he asked what all this was then. Biliath replied with, "The cost," and the words dripped with a fury and bitterness that he'd never heard in her voice before.
Yeah.
Then she turned.
That line honestly goes hard, that reply right there, the cost. Like, imagine being the prince, right? And, like, seeing her and, you know, some of her troops coming at him like that, getting the news that, yeah, Tambarat's been taken, and then, you know, she drops that line, and I'm assuming she has Ram's corpse there, maybe, you know, to actually bury, maybe, you know, I don't know. I don't know if Kabar would be generous enough to allow them to take his body back to be buried in Amoni Ram or not, you know, I don't know.
Shouting an order. One of the land crossers backed up, presenting its cargo doors. They were yanked open, and Ansul caught a glance of what was inside. Stacked coffins. His heart sank as he asked if these were the victims of the Deva. Biliath shook her head as she stepped inside and dragged one of the coffins out herself. It scraped against the packed sand as she brought it before her prince and began undoing the lid. She informed him that no, the Deva killed thousands more than this. These are just his brother's victims. She pulled off the lid, and his breath caught as he looked upon the corpse of General Haram.
Yeah.
His skin was pale, dried brown blood staining the underside of his neck where his throat had been cut. His prosthetics had been sheared off, the metal twisted and fragmented, but lovingly lashed back to his limbs. General Haram, who had practically lived in the palace when his father first fell sick, supporting his mother as they set up the system to manage the Emperor's condition. General Haram, with the broad smile that he'd always worn when amusing the two princes as children, bouncing Ansul on his knee and entertaining Kabar with war stories. General Haram, who had gifted Kabar his first blade and taught him how to use it. Ansul haltingly asked if his brother killed Haram, and Biliath replied that he accused him of some made-up treason, found him guilty, and had her execute him. Ansul could scarcely breathe as he asked why, to which she explained that he wanted the only man who could challenge his power out of the way, and he wanted Tambarat to be his victory and his victory alone, and because he's insane.
Mm-hmm.
He dragged his eyes away from Haram's mangled form as the other soldiers opened the other land crossers, quietly.
Really does make me, wonder, right? Like through our actual history, how many of events have taken place in a similar fashion where someone won a great victory, they claim it as their own, but it really wasn't. A general, soldiers, whoever underneath them were the real, ones that claimed the victory or, at least achieved the victory. And, et cetera, et cetera. I can't personally think of any like actual historical stories off the top of my mind of instances like that, but I'm sure it's happened. Where someone wants to claim all the glory for themselves so that they can look better politically, et cetera, et cetera. So
Quietly removing their cargo. More and more coffins, more and more bodies. Officers, soldiers, all dead. Bodies charred and burnt and dirty. Prosthetics torn away before being lovingly recovered and reattached, giving them some dignity in death. Hundreds of bodies, all draped in Biliath's standard. He turned to her, and her eyes were hard. She spat out that they were loyal soldiers, her soldiers, put to the sword, and Haram's blood is on her hands. Ansul tried to argue with her, but she cut him off, stating that she should have cut Kabar's throat when she had the chance. In her quiet fury, he couldn't even argue. Who could, confronted with this horror? He went silent, both of them watching the coffins be carried off the machines, and he realized why he didn't recognize the formation. It was a funeral procession.
Yeah.
He looked down at Haram's ugly, mangled corpse, staring back at him. Biliath whispered to him that she wanted this to end without bloodshed. She really did, but this is too much. He didn't say anything, and she continued, saying that this blood is on his hands as well. He let this happen, just as she did. Haram's dead eyes pierced him, staring into his soul. Biliath tells him that blood needs to be paid in blood, and every drop of blood Kabar has in his body isn't enough to atone for this. But it's a start.
Blood for the blood
Kabar is
god.
given the order that the bodies of traitors are not to enter Amoni Ram. She's not leaving her men, and they'll stay here until the flesh rots and the bones turn to dust. She will not abandon them again. She turned to him, eyes incandescent with rage, jabbing a finger into his chest. Or he can do what he should have done ages ago, and admit what his brother has become. Hundreds of corpses, hundreds more soldiers refusing to abandon their comrades.
It's a pretty shitty position for Ansul to be in, right? You know what I mean? Like, he's got his brother on one side, who legitimately is, pretty crazy and power hungry, and from everything that they've talked about, would not be a great leader, but it's still his brother, still a family member, you know what I mean? Like, it's, and you're also talking about like royal bloodlines, so it's not just like something where brothers could sit down and like really hash it out. That's gonna have like ramifications for the entire empire. But then you also, you've got the woman you love, who will end up being his concubine, not even his empress. And who's really kind of forcing him down a road that he doesn't want to go, essentially. He's willing to help her, but he doesn't want to harm in any way his brother. But now after this, she's basically saying, we're going to kill him, that's it. You know what I mean? And he's really kind of, he's the prince, and he is the, He is the brother. But I mean, what could you really say in that situation? You know, what really could you do? Seeing someone who you grew up with, was a mentor, was someone who helped take care of your father and mother and family, and was a great leader of your people, essentially being thrown aside, cast as a traitor, and then murdered without honor, and then said that their body doesn't even get to return to Amon Ram properly, you know? Not to mention the other soldiers. I'm assuming these bodies are the soldiers that from the decimation, you know? So what really can you do? What really can you say in his position? You know, there's not really much that you can do. It's a tough place, man. But it also, I think, really is obviously an eye-opening situation where there really isn't much of another choice. You know, even let's say even this stuff didn't happen, Haram did live, you know, etc., right? In these kinds of situations, I feel like it's always going to have to come down to, you know, if you're going to have some kind of coup like this, you got to eliminate the opposition, because it's always going to end up coming to bite you in the ass if you don't, you know what I mean? So I don't know. Anyway, let's continue.
Expecting him to do something, to give an order, expecting him to rule. Ansul found himself stating that Kabar does not rule Amoni Ram yet, so they should bury the dead in the cemeteries with full honors. The soldiers lumbered forth, lifting the coffins and beginning to carry them through the city gates. He looked to Biliath. She didn't look back at him. Ansul stumbled through the streets, mind adrift somewhere else. Biliath led in front of him. They were both cloaked again. She had sneaked him out of the apartment, but now it was the dead of night rather than the day. The spice markets were silent. There were no tea shops open. Even the hashish dens had quieted. The pair of them walked through the streets, utterly silent. He couldn't focus enough to ask where they were going. If he tried to think, his mind would flash with the image. Haram's dead, pale face, all blood drained, eyes popping out. His prosthetics sheared apart and his throat stained with his own blood. Killed by his brother. The phrase kept echoing through his head. Killed by his brother. All of those men, not just Haram. It bounced around his skull until he was gently pulled forward by Biliath, and he realized they were at the palace gates. He dropped his cloak, and the guards apologized for not recognizing him. He nodded absent-mindedly, and they let him through. Still holding his hand, Biliath led him across the courtyard, up the stairs into the palace, through the servant corridors, until they reached the side door and pushed into the throne room. He finally acknowledged the journey as she led him across the tile into the dais and sat him in the foulard throne. He let it happen. He hadn't sat on this throne since he was a child too small to realize what it signified. He asked her why they're here, and she replied simply that he needs to understand. She slipped a hand inside her breastplate, withdrawing a small, white ceramic cylinder marked with indentations and bumps. He dimly recognized it as belonging to his machine. She tells him that he's not going to understand unless he sees it for himself, and she places the cylinder into the slot on the throne's armrest, moving his hand into the depression. The throne began to click and grind from underneath him, and he was about to rise to his feet and shout, but then the throne room wasn't there anymore. Instead, he was standing on a field turned graveyard. This wasn't battle. These were endless corpses, stacked on top of one another, flies swarming the rotting flesh.
He's seeing her or Haram's memories from what just happened. So yeah, that would be a powerful way to seal the deal for sure.
They went on as far as the eye could see, stretching to the horizon, intermingling between Deva and Mechanite. The stench of death invaded his nostrils, his stomach turning. And then he found himself turning, eyes planted in someone else's body. Kabar, at the far end of the killing field, the brother he had not seen in so many years. He was older, his nose sharper, a darker, heavier air about him. Carried himself high even as the soldiers marched in front of him, dragging more bodies and flinging them into this interminable pit of death. There were thousands of corpses here, at the least. He felt his fists clench around the hilt of a sword, involuntarily, as Kabar smiled. Then he was in a battlefield, pressed prone to the ground, explosions overhead. Terror gripped his heart, the fires were blinding. He was pressed against a corpse, a mechanite whose head had been split in twain, his brains leaking out over Ansul's pauldron.
I wonder if this is the memories of the Davite slave, the little kid. He somehow was able to like capture them.
They were smashed into the corner of this bridge, while other soldiers rushed headlong into the fray, screaming, firing their bolts. He couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. He could only watch, pressed between corpses, as a Deva tree beast tore out of the gate to the city, arms swinging, the sheer force of the swing eviscerating several soldiers. Then it cut to him standing behind Kabar on a hill, overlooking the charge, watching it fail, be repelled, the screaming, the shouting, watching his brother casually shrug in the face of such carnage, return to his tent and meal.
Sounds like it's more of her memories or Haram's memories then, right? Because like the child wouldn't have that kind of perspective, you wouldn't think.
And then he was in the body of his love, Biliath, sinking to her knees, watching his old Uncle Haram twisting and writhing in the stone courtyard, screaming like a man possessed as he bled from every limb. Unable to intervene, casting a hopeless glance at Kabar, who was watching Haram die with satisfaction. No, glee on his face. Glee at a job well done. Glee that his enemy was dead. Glee that he had gotten away with this brazen lie. Sheer, manic excitement that no one would be able to stand in the way now.
I'm getting a lot of I'm getting some Joffrey vibes from Game of Thrones, you know what I mean? Like, that's who Kabar is really reminding me of now with these descriptions. It really sounds very similar to that kind of character. So, I mean, just to give you, I guess, more of an idea, you know, or at least a comparison.
Those golden eyes matching his. And then those golden eyes became the rich brown of a Deva boy, being dragged away from Kabar on a lead, and again being limply dragged by his neck from the back of Kabar's tent, bleeding all over, dead, and again lying twisted and splayed on so many other corpses, so many other victims. And then he screamed with the impossible weight of knowledge of what his brother had become, and it was over, and he was on his knees in front of the throne, and Biliath was helping him up, holding his shaking form as he pressed his forehead against her shoulder, panting.
See, now, to me, right, like, if they have that kind of technology, couldn't they just show that to, like, everyone in the royal court, right, as, like, evidence of, I guess, his misconduct, his misuse? I mean, granted, he's still a prince, and he's still in charge of those armies, right? But that still shows his lack of... It's evidence showing essentially his lack of leadership, his lack of empathy, his lack of caring, obviously, and how just bad of a person he is. I don't know, maybe in their political system that could be used as a way of leveraging, you know, legally, saying that he's not fit to be emperor, run the country, etc. I don't know. But either way, if you try to go that route, it'll probably just end up leading to a civil war, right? Because there's going to be people who will side with Kabar for political gain, as well as Ansul for their own political gain, whether they're, believe in the cause one way or the other. And it would probably just end up leading to a civil war anyway. So, I mean, to avoid that, especially while you're at war with two other nations, at this point, the Sarkics, Nulkins, whatever, might not be a thing. This might be early enough in their history to where they're just at war with the Davites, but, who knows? Anyway.
She asked if he saw it, and he nodded, still shaking. She stated that he knows what he has to do, but he replied that he doesn't know if he can. She helped him up.
That's straight out of Star Wars. I know what I have to do, but I don't know if I have the strength.
Drawing a vial from her breastplate, corked, full of something white, and she pressed it into his hand. She said that she'd be with him through it all, but she's done all that she can. She can't help him, show him more than she has already. He asks how she brings herself to do these things, the visions of the battle fresh in his mind. She didn't answer for some time, but finally she managed to explain that you step away from your body and you let something else take over, something unburdened by honor or thought, and you let it do what needs to be done. He stared at the vial, filled with horrified uncertainty, and he asks if he does this, how much for it to be instant. Biliath thought about Haram's words. 1 drop, and the priestess had suffered for weeks. The full vial would have killed her instantly.
Yeah.
And then she thought about Haram's dead face.
Right.
No light behind his eyes, prosthetics torn apart, life and body destroyed for his cause.
She obviously is going to want him to suffer, so she's going to tell him an amount, more than likely anyway, to draw out the length of his suffering before he dies. For me, though, right, like, even this is just me personally, if I was in her position, like, as much as I would want him to suffer as well, it would be better just to get it over with. Just quickly as possible, dump the whole thing in there, have him take it all, get it over with, it's done. It sucks. He won't necessarily, have that kind of suffering. There won't be as much justice served, but it'll be done in the end. And then, you can start getting to righting things, getting the Empire where it should be and preventing more situations like this, where innocent soldiers, patriots, whatever, are killed, needlessly, essentially.
She finally replied, telling him 1 drop. He found himself leaving the throne room alone, letting his feet carry him. He tried not to think about what he'd agreed to, but his mind swirled with the visions, implacable. His brother with a sword held high above Haram's neck. His brother next to him in the pantries, feasting on sweets stolen from the kitchens. His brother watching, bored, as the bodies were carried out of his tent. His brother falling asleep by his bed when he had been stricken with fever as a child. He didn't bother with the servants' corridors, walking directly through the vast hallways and over the mosaics and tiles. The tapestries on the walls told stories he didn't pay attention to as he swept through the palace, through once familiar courtyards and halls and gardens, no destination in mind. The few courtiers and servants sunk into bows on seeing him, and he didn't care enough to tell them to rise. He'd run through these same hallways once, chasing his brother and being chased in turn, laughing, shouting, grabbing, and tackling. But that had been when they were children, before his father had taken to raising Kabar as an emperor ought to be raised. Before they had stopped playing together, and Kabar had spent more and more time in the garrison. Before he turned cruel and hard as he grew older, decrying his younger brother as a soft-shelled weakling. before Ansul had left the palace at 16, so he wouldn't have to see what his brother was becoming. The sight of the hallways didn't bring back warm recollections anymore, just a sinking feeling, the pain of memories he didn't want to think about. He looked out over what was once a garden. The plants had been torn out now, but he still remembered the purple and gold flowers and the lush greenery surrounding them as a teenage Kabar rubbed dirt into a cut on his younger brother's knee. "Shush," he had said, "and not to cry, as their father will be upset." Ansul had stopped his sniffling immediately, eager to follow his brother's commands, but asked why. Kabar responded that father says weakness is for girls and cowards. He has to be strong, like an emperor. And from this angle, through his collar, the young Ansul's eyes saw the constellation of cuts and bruises and scars underneath Kabar's tunic. Some old and faded, most fresh. Reaching out to touch them as Kabar recoiled, shoving his dear brother backward into the dirt, snarling at him not to touch him.
So obviously it sounds like he is a victim of his father's abuse as well, just like his mother was. So is it any wonder why he turned out the way he did?
He straightened his tunic while Ansul watched, eyes wide, unable to excise the image of what he had seen. And then the memory was gone, and Ansul was a man again, sitting in the now bare gardens, and his head was in his hands, and he was crying bitter tears for the brother he had lost, and would never have again. Just before the sun rose, he found himself leaving the palace, wandering in a daze to the academy grounds. It was early in the morning, and most of the clerics were indisposed, so nobody was there to express their admiration or kneel. He was glad. He didn't think he would be able to handle it right now. He spread his robes, sitting on a bench across from Bumaro's tree as it caught the light of the rising sun. And between the glimmering gold and green leaves and the pale wood marbled with foulade, he saw the dark, creeping brown of the fungal rot on one of the branches, eating away just underneath the surface, no matter how perfect the leaves looked. It had gotten worse from his last visit, and now threatened to escape from this branch to the main trunk of the tree. He stared at it, at the thinning space between the rot and the trunk, until the sun fully rose and the clerics began arriving, casting sidelong glances at the seated prince. Eventually, one approached him, asking him if he was all right. The voice sounded distant, muffled, as though speaking through a blanket. Ansul kept staring at the tree, until finally his lips moved, telling him to shear it. They must cull the branch to save the tree. The cleric nodded, somewhat taken aback, and had it arranged post-haste. Ansul still sat, watching as another cleric arrived with a ladder and took a saw to the midpoint of the branch, cutting it away until it groaned and fell to the ground, exposing the interior flesh of the tree. It was rotting from the inside. It was a day of celebration in Amoni Ram. The streets.
So I wonder if that's supposed to be like symbolic, you know. In one of the previous videos, we'd heard that there was, there was someone who was tending to the tree, and there was like rust rot, I believe is what they called it, that was getting in, and he was trying to take care of it, and the prince, someone said, sometimes it'll take care of itself if you just leave it alone. So he told him to leave it alone. But I don't know. I wonder if this is kind of a symbology. The tree is rotting, and so is the brother. So kind of like the line of kings is rotting away. Kind of similar to I guess Gondor and Lord of the Rings with the tree of Gondor. It'll start sprouting again when the king returns, the proper king to lead Gondor. Maybe it's gonna be something like that, where once the evil prince is removed, then a proper ruler is reinstated, that the tree will be revived again, kind of a thing, indicating the right thing had been done.
Usually busy, were now utterly packed. There was hardly room to squeeze between two people. Entire families were out, dressed in their finest clothing with freshly polished foulard, the women in newly done makeup and their hair prettied. The men had been released from their work for the day, save for the market men. They meandered through the crowds, exchanging grilled meats for coin. There was a buzz of excitement in the air, electric and pervasive. Like a lumbering wave, the crowd contracted towards the eastern gate, moving in slow motion. Normally, the walls of Amoni Ram were off limits to all but the guardsmen. Their restrictions had been slightly relaxed for the occasion. Nobles, merchants, the wealthy and influential found themselves lining the eastern portion of the wall, leaning against the battlements with their children, oohing and eyeing with excitement as the great cloud of dust approached from the distance. Eventually, it took form. A grand army, 20,000 men deep, stretching far into the horizon, throwing up sand as they marched. Land crossers moving foot by foot, Legion soldiers with their golden arms and armor, Imperial guards holding up the feathered standards of the Shahal, approaching steadily closer to Amoni Ram. When they grew close enough to make out the figure leading them, another wave of excitement shot through the crowds on the walls, and from there to the masses in the streets. And eventually, more whispers began to pass through the crowd, followed quickly by shouts and calls to move, to back away. The sea of people parted to allow the passage of the Prince of Amoni Ram and his Imperial guards, bearing the standard of the city. They sank into deep kneels, for today was a day of great respect for the dynasty. Ansul let himself be carried along, like a bird on the desert currents, his mind lost elsewhere. He was in his finest robes, imported and hand-stitched, intricate tailoring and gilding with real foulard. General Malene was to his right, Biliath was to his left. He wished he could reach out and squeeze her hand. They marched forward, surrounded by a circle of Imperial guardsmen, until they reached the open plaza before the eastern gate. Malene whispered to him that they wait for his order, and Ansul nodded. His legs felt shaky. Had he eaten since last night?
Yeah.
He dismissed the thought and raised...
I mean, yeah, right? Like, if I were in his position, I probably wouldn't have been able to have slept. I don't know if I'd been able to eat. I would be extremely anxious. My mind would be running and racing with all these thoughts, all those memories of events and then things to come. Trying to plan things out. When should I do it? How should I do it? Should I even do it? How could I do it? Should I really just use one drop? Should I use the whole thing? Should I tell someone else about it? Like my mind would be racing with a million different thoughts and different things. And yeah, I don't know.
Raised his voice past the hoarseness into a shout, commanding them to open the gate.
I feel like there's going to be some kind of twist at the end here. I don't know what. I don't know. It's going to be a situation where like they have all this buildup and they have these plans to do this thing to like poison him, and then something else is going to happen and he'll be killed before they can do that. Or they'll end up doing the memory transfer thing instead of the poison. Maybe he'll actually end up taking the throne somehow, before they're able to do that. And then like the memory, maybe his mom will have set up some kind of trap on the throne to transfer the consciousness. I don't know. But I feel like there's going to be some kind of big unexpected twist here as we're reaching the end of the story.
The guardsmen heard him and repeated the shout, and the guards on the wall repeated it again, and soon 100 men were echoing the command. The pumps sprung to life, rumbling as they pulled the chains back, moving the massive gates back on their rails. The army marched in, to wild screams and cheers. The land crossers pushed in, surrounded by officers carrying armfuls of looted treasures, Deva statues, artworks, weapons, shields, richly decorated suits of armor, woven robes from their priestesses. Huge strings of petrified wood charms dangled from their necks as Amoni Ram roared in triumph and approval for her returning sons. And then the soldiers parted. The crowd sunk into a deep bow in a wave from front to back, and Ansul laid eyes on his brother, Kabar, clad in fine gilded armor, riding a chestnut stallion into the plaza. He dismounted, raising a hand to quell the cheers from the people, before approaching Ansul, the only one not kneeling. They embraced, Kabar's armor digging into his skin. Ansul kissed both of his cheeks, no joy in his eyes. The two were in the Court of Lions, blessedly alone, as Ansul tells his brother that he looks well. The parade had taken most of the day, the pair of them riding on twin horses in a spiral through Amoni Ram, slowly approaching the palace.
Yeah.
Ansul
Seeing in that too, right? Like, having to spend the entire day going around parading all of this, like, especially again with all the memories and things that I've seen and know, like, I don't know, it would be a difficult thing to like put up a front, a vision of happiness, thankful that the older brother has returned victorious to take his rightful place as the new ruler. Like, it would be hard to like keep that front going, man.
Ansul's back was drenched in sweat. Kabar was little better, so they both sat on the expensive chaises and cushions, staining them, uncaring. Kabar smiled and replied that he is well. These victories have brought honor to his name, to their name. Ansul nodded, leaning back. It was strange. His brother's face was at once familiar and unfamiliar. Not the same face he had borne when he had left so many years ago, but Ansul had seen this new, sharp, hard face in Biliath's memories. It was like recognizing something from a dream. Kabar asked him if he had something on his face, but Ansul just apologized. Kabar replied that he must look haggard after so many months on the battlefield, but Ansul told him that he looks fine actually, and his hair is still cut short. Kabar explained that he had an attendant do that before he arrived, but Ansul peered into his memories, into Biliath's memories. Kabar's short hair, trimmed ever so neat by attendants with golden shears, while his soldiers had their beards matted with dirt and blood and grime.
Mm-hmm.
Kabar continued, stating that he'll have the attendants here handle it before the coronation, and Ansul's breath caught in his throat. He remarked that he must be excited, but Kabar just shrugged, stating that he takes no joy in assuming the throne, as it's just duty. And before he could stop it, the vision passed through Ansul's head, of Kabar holding a sword over the neck of the only man standing in his way to the throne, of his golden eyes alight with the sheer glee of it all. His stomach turned.
Part of me wonders, right, is like Kabar could be telling the truth. Like, he might not actually necessarily really care about the throne and ruling, and because it might just be like another thing for him to have to do instead of being able to do what he wants to do, right? You know what I mean? Like, he could be a person, because he could actually hate it just because it's everything that his father put him through and how he raised them and, seemingly abused him, all to prepare him for the throne. It could be a situation where he doesn't want to actually really take it, but he kind of just has to because that's what it's expected of him, etc. Wouldn't it be interesting if that was the twist? If the twist at the end here is, he comes home and he says, you know what? I don't want it. You take it. I really don't want it, and doesn't put up a fight, doesn't anything, just, abdicates it and gives it to his brother.
The same golden eyes he had. The same golden eyes that had looked on in concern when he had broken a bone as a child. that had matched his gaze while rubbing dirt into his wounds. The eyes of a murderer, of a madman. Ansul asks if it's not better to wait, perhaps, causing Kabar to lean forward, asking why he would wait. Ansul fidgeted, hands tying themselves into knots while the pit in his stomach expanded. He ventured that, with this news about Haram, people might want time to process it, but Kabar cut him off, telling him not to take that traitor's name. Ansul replies that he still can't believe it, as he bounced them on his knee as boys. He served the Legion faithfully in the East. He doesn't know why Haram would turn traitor now. Kabar just shrugged and remarks that who can say why a coward does what he does? Ansul hesitates before asking if Kabar is absolutely sure that he was a traitor. Kabar replies that he wrested the admission from the lips of a Deva assassin sent to cut him in his sleep, who had given up Haram by name. Ansul lowered his face into his hands to avoid showing his own eyes, lest his brother see the fury in them. Even clasped in darkness, all he could see was Haram's face, rendered in bloody detail in Biliath's lap. Gurgling, choking on his own blood, begging for the sweet mercy of death. And then again, cold and lifeless in a casket carried from Tambarat. The Legion's most honored warrior. He should have come home to the hero's welcome Kabar received. Instead, he came home in a casket. Ansul forced his fists to relax and rose to his feet, muscles outside his control carrying him to the cart in the corner of the room. The presence of the vial on a string around his neck weighed more than any load. Hands...
It's kind of crazy that you would have that on you like that, especially with, what if your brother asks what it is? You know what I mean? Like, there's any number of things that could go wrong. Something could happen, it could break, and then I don't know, that's kind of risky just to keep it on you all the time like that.
Shaking, he raised the pot, pouring the tea into 2 ceramic cups, and asked Kabar what his plans were after the coronation. Kabar looked to the painted ceiling, decorated richly with murals of past kings and absent gods. He didn't notice his brother unlooping something from around his neck, and mused that he can't say he's too sure, in all honesty, but he'll have to marry, obviously. Ansul asked him flatly and emotionlessly if he intends to follow tradition in that regard. He rolled the small vial between 2 fingers, watching the liquid flow, fingers uncertain, hesitating. Kabar supposes that he does, but remarks that Biliath isn't fit to be an empress, although she'll make a fine toy in his harem for a few years. He grinned at his brother, commenting that they're uncouth thoughts maybe, but asks if his brother can blame him. Ansul's fist tightened.
Yeah.
His breathing slowed, and time slowed with it. He reached up, uncorked the vial, and tipped it, letting a single drop slip into the tea. Then it was gone again, slipped into a pocket of his robes, and he was serving the tea for the both of them, and watching his brother lift the cup, and drinking from it, and then it was an hour later, and Ansul was doubled over in the courtyard, one hand on the wall as he vomited into the flower bed, eyes wide and bloodshot with the weight of what he'd done. And Biliath was next to him, holding his hair back, holding his shoulder as he collapsed into heaving, racking sobs.
It would just be hilarious if he accidentally swapped the glasses, right? And he ends up drinking the poison on accident, that would be the hell of a twist here at the end. But anyway, it gives me thoughts of the Princess Bride, that that scene where they're doing the test. Anyway,
it took 6 days for Kabar to die. On the first day, he grew suddenly ill, and the feast in his honor at the palace was postponed. He waved a hand, assuring Helena that he was quite fine, quite prepared for the ceremonies tomorrow, before retiring to his quarters. Sickness from the long journey, from the shock of returning home. On the second day, his attendants found him in the morning, white sheets stained with red. He was on his knees on the balcony, head through the bars of the railing, vomiting blood into the courtyard below.
Jesus.
With what words he could make out, he insisted that he was fine, that the sweat matting his hair was nothing. On the third day, the healers and alchemists came, rushed from across Amoni Ram to treat the ailing prince. The finest minds of Amoni Ram brought their concoctions, their tinctures, poultices, and potions, and the terrified empress held her son's head up from his pillows, while he struggled to sip what the healers promised would cure whatever he had been stricken with. On the fourth day, the true pain began. He bled into his eyes, rendering him blind, and his nose gushed more freely. He became weak and unable to move without assistance from his attendants or his now weeping mother. Not that he did, lying writhing in bed with agony. He couldn't form the words to say where it was coming from, just laying with his back arching and his lungs screaming until they were dry. The sheets twisted around his legs, and he drenched himself in his own sweat and urine. On the fifth day, he received a visitor. He had been moved from his chambers to a more secluded, private, and open wing of the palace, with the hope the fresh air would help him. Healers and servants milled about, unwilling to open the doors to his chambers, the muffled screaming audible just beyond it. They caught sight of the prince's twisting form as the visitor opened the door to enter, and then it was closed again. His visitor took a seat in the chair by his bed, and waited patiently. It took a few minutes, but eventually the miasma of pain wore away, and Kabar's hands groped his way across the bed to feel the prosthetics of his visitor. He gasped out in surprise that Biliath came to him, and bid her to come closer. He half hissed it, hands scrabbling up to her arm and blindly pulling her close. He says that she's always been loyal to him, to her master. The healers can do nothing, and this is no natural illness. He cut himself off again as another blinding hot flash of pain made all of his muscles arch. He groaned through gritted teeth as it passed and his body relaxed. He states that he must have been poisoned, and she asks if he'd like her to fetch the guards. He shook his head wildly, not looking at her. With his shirt off, she could see a constellation of scars and unhealed burns across his chest. She idly wondered where they came from on a boy raised in such luxury, before dismissing the thought. He laughed, throat hoarse, stating that it's too late and he's dying. Haram's last laugh, maybe, that insipid, traitorous wretch. Then he pulled her closer yet, blind eyes focusing on nothing, and told her that she must protect Ansul for him. The dynasty cannot die, and the empire cannot die with him, so she must protect Ansul. It took a moment for her to bite back the bile and answer, telling him that she will. Then she leaned closer and began stating names. She went on for minutes, naming the names seared into her memory, Fulad fingers wrapped tightly around Kabar's arm, staring into his blind, pathetic, terrified eyes while reciting the names of the 200 dead laid to fitful rest in Amoni Ram's graveyards. She finished with Haram's name, and then he heard her rising to her feet. He whimpered for her to not leave him alone, but nobody answered. On the 6th day, Kabar Bumaro, Shahal, Crown Prince of Amoni Ram, heir to the Fulad throne, died. The Imperial Guard flanked Ansul as he stared off into the distance. In front of him, the clerics waved their incense censers, herbs burning, smoke rising into the sky of Amoni Ram. His mother was leaning on his shoulder in her black veils, weeping openly, sobbing just quiet enough not to be heard under the chanting from the clerics.
Wouldn't it be interesting if the twist is that the vision she saw of Amoni Ram burning was because Kabar did die, and that his ruthlessness was actually what Amoni Ram needed for it to survive? That would be an interesting twist. Anyway.
They read from the old texts, the first prayers, when Bumaro I was laid to rest by his son. In some dim part of his mind, Ansul appreciated the irony. There were thousands of people attending the funeral outside the palace gates, clutching each other, weeping, sobbing prayers for their lost prince, felled by disease just after single-handedly wresting the jewel from the crown of the Deva. The vile work of their priestesses, no doubt. Vengeance would come eventually, but today was a day of mourning. The inner party was inside the courtyard in the Court of Swords, where generations of the Bumaros were interred in neat, simple rows. A different Fulad sword speared into the dirt of each grave, an old tradition. They had no need for their weapons anymore, after all. His mother continued to weep as the prayers drew to a close, the three clerics circling the empty grave, retreating to the rest of the crowd. Malene was there, all the high clerics, shahs, and governors that could arrive in time. Biliath was by his side, wings folded, eyes low, heads hung. A few cried as the coffin was carried out by the Imperial Guard and placed into the grave. Most didn't. Finally, as the Fulad casket was placed inside and the dirt was filled over, the High Cleric looked to Ansul. He moved robotically, without thought or consideration. Stepping forward, grasping Kabar's sword, kneeling before the grave, and then spearing it into the dirt. There were no words to say. Nothing that could absolve him of this. His mother's sobbing was the only sound in the courtyard now. The cleric gingerly touched his shoulder. He barely felt it, as the cleric told him that it's time, and the Emperor is waiting. The door to the throne room slammed heavily behind him. The Imperial Guard were stationed outside, sealing the entrance. In the vast, magnificent hall, he was alone now. Except for his father. He was lounging on that same chaise, now placed just in front of the throne. Eyes milky, unfocused, sucking in wheezing breaths, draped in the finest silk robes and jewelry from across the empire he had once ruled with an iron fist. Ansul approached, heels clicking against the tile. There were no guards in the hall. No one to judge, but he still felt compelled to sink into a kneel for this dying man. Not.
I'm waiting again. I'm waiting for some kind of twist here. The twist also could very well be that, again, the memory transference technology actually is already there. And even though they've gone through all of this, killed his brother, everything, the Emperor's consciousness is going to go into Ansul anyway. So if they had just... They could have not gone through this, and it would, you know, Ansul could have lived. Biliath would have then been able to, I don't know. I guess she still would have ended up, you know, a concubine, etc. They probably necessarily wouldn't have had their happy ending, but at least he would have still been alive, you know? So if it turns out that that is the case, then the Emperor is just going to inhabit another body, and I guess that cycle of abuse is going to happen to Biliath now, because she'll end up becoming the Empress, right? More than likely. So that could be the interesting twist here. But I'm waiting for something. I feel like there's going to be some other kind of twist here at the end, because I don't know, just how the brother died, you know, Kabar. I feel like it went too smoothly, too perfectly, you know. Ansul did what he had to do, and it literally happened without a hitch, without any kind of suspect. It's honestly interesting to me that through all this, Kabar never suspected Biliath, you know? Like, I feel like maybe he didn't, again, catch on to her intent in his royal tent or whatever when the Davite slave was taken out, that she was ready to strike him there, and a couple of other times, you know? So maybe he didn't catch on to that, didn't see it, or just, you know, who knows? But yeah, it feels like there's something more is still gonna happen. There's still gonna be one last twist here, as just because, again, it feels like everything went too smoothly. And I as I said before, I don't feel like Ansul and Biliath are gonna have their happily ever after. I feel like there's gonna be something else happens, and so it could be right here. You know, Ansul is meeting with the Emperor. They're getting ready to, I guess, transfer authority, and that could also be the consciousness. So I guess let's see.
Not that his father would ever notice. The sucking breaths didn't so much as skip a beat. But Ansul did regardless, kneeling at the side of the chaise, where his father's hand dangled limp. He told him that Kabar is dead, and he is his only heir now. He is to abdicate, as he always promised, and should grant him the throne to rule. With no response other than sucking and wheezing, Ansul looked up. The rasping breaths echoed out through the hall, and his eyelids were lowered. Ansul remarks that he's not going to do that, because he can't. He has no throne to abdicate. In spite of himself, looking at this husk of a man, Ansul felt rage well up. He's not a ruler. He's not even alive. This diseased old thing, more machine than man, mechanically clinging to life. This figure had once ruled and dominated the palace, ruled and dominated him. Ansul told him that he's responsible for all of this, for Kabar's killing. He made Kabar into himself, as his father did to him, all too eager to mark the same bruises. His hands shook with blind, red-hot rage. He snatched out, ringed finger hooking around his father's sheer robe and pulling it away, exposing his chest. Almost completely machinery, wires and pipes poking into and under his skin, keeping his blood warm and pumping. Sucking pumps keeping his kidneys filtering and his liver alive. What little flesh there still was dominated by cuts, age-old burns, scars older than his son was. His lip hung lazily, drool collecting at the tip. Ansul's voice shook as he called him a miserable old bastard and stated that he never wanted this. He never wanted any of this, but he made it so. It's the only thing he's capable of, taking and ruining other people, making them what he wants. His mother, Kabar, and him. Ansul's lip curled, and he moved without even really being aware of what he was doing, fingers dancing across his father's chest, flicking switches, pulling out pumps and cables. He spat that he brought him to this, him and the rest of this damned dynasty. Ansul takes, and he cannot be certain it is for the right reasons, and not simply because he made him this way. Not simply because Ansul wanted what Kabar had, because this cursed blood infests him. Fluid spilled, the rhythm was disrupted, and then everything was being yanked out or smashed, crushed until it shorted and died, and the Emperor's breathing was erratic, and Ansul's hands were still moving, bitter tears in his hardened eyes. A hand wrapped around his wrist, and he looked up in shock. Haith's fingers, suddenly possessed with an iron grip, locking Ansul's movements. Ansul gasped, trying to pull away fruitlessly, but he couldn't. This was the strength of the dying. His father's mouth hung open, dead silent, but the milkiness was gone from his eyes, replaced by a sputtering golden, the dying embers of a once great fire. With a wrench, the son pulled away and fell backward heavily. He lay sprawled on the tile, staring up, his father's gaunt, sunken appearance boring into him. The two of them said nothing, staring at one another. Then Haith raised one long, bony finger, pointing it dead at his son, face aghast, golden eyes peering at what awaited him in the next life. A whisper escaped his lips, calling him his son. Ansul scarcely dared to breathe, but said that yes, it's him. Haith, however, called him Kabar, his son, and in shock, Ansul's gaze matched his father's. In that moment, two pairs of golden eyes staring at each other across the throne room, Ansul saw a mirror. A revenant, empire incarnate, a blood-soaked dynasty as old as Amoni Ram itself. The same golden eyes buried in his own skull. And with that, Haith Bumaro, Emperor of the Broken Empire, Lord of the Fulad Throne, shuddered and died. Biliath lay in her cot, staring at the sandstone ceiling. It had been a few days since the Emperor's death. Ansul had left the throne room, visibly shaken. The Imperial Guard collected the body. They had known this was going to happen. They had merely expected Kabar to be the one to do it. They had knelt when Ansul exited, his robe dragging behind him, greeting him not as prince, but as emperor.
It's kind of messed up, right? Like, it seems like the tradition is to keep him alive long enough until when the son's ready to take the throne, then the son has to kill the father. So not only did Ansul have to kill his brother, right, to prevent an insane person from ruling, then he has to kill his father too. That's a little bit much, you know what I'm saying?
Sovereign of all Amoni Ram. She had been there, seen the shock on his face, seen his faraway eyes, lost in a different place while he let his body do what needed to be done. She was familiar with the experience, but his face had been so empty. His proper coronation was not for a few days. A noise roused her from staring at the ceiling. She sat up. She was in her room in the garrison, really only for sleeping, so no one would ask where she was laying her head at night. Most of her things had been moved into it for the time being, at least until the coronation. It was the forest beasts. She had almost forgotten about them. The small, wood-woven cage containing the little creatures. They were her little secret. She approached the cage. One of the forest beasts was eating one of the others. For a moment, she thought it was the one she had given the poison to, but no. That one had been the bully of the litter. Fat, white skin, with turquoise stripes along its back. This one was leaner, with a shelling pattern. She remembered it. It had been meek and timid, toadying to its brother. And now here it was, choking down one of its smaller brothers almost whole, pinkish blood staining the stones around them. She stared at it, frowning, unable to move. Ansul stared at the man in the mirror, unrecognizing. This wasn't him. He didn't live in the palace. He didn't wear gems and jewels. He certainly didn't wear these robes, gilded and intricate and as long as 3 men, dragging along the tile floors.
I would hate that shit too, honestly.
But here he stood, the man in the mirror looking back at him. He heard a noise and turned. The door opened, and in the half-second it did, he could hear the outside. The Imperial guards holding the door, preparing to escort him to the throne room. The nobles and dignitaries and courtiers and generals and governors all milling about, chatting with each other, counting themselves lucky to witness a new coronation in Amoni Ram within their lifetime. Then the door closed again, and Biliath was standing there. She approached. The two greeted one another, and Biliath told him that everyone's waiting. He returned to staring in the mirror as Biliath came up to his side. Her own armor was freshly polished and the fabric repaired from the damage it had taken in battle. Her sword hung by her side. He tells her that this wasn't how he ever thought it would be, and she agrees. He asks if it had to happen this quickly, to which she replies that the clerics don't want to leave any gap in succession. Kabar's death has startled them. Ansul ponders his death, how casual it was, and how attributable it was as an act of nature. He asks her how you can be sure you did the right thing for the right reasons. She asks, in turn, if there are wrong reasons, and he looked at her, imagining her stripped of her finery, locked away in Kabar's harem house, never to see him again. He replies that there are always wrong reasons, and she thought about it for some time before saying that she doesn't know, but they did it, and now it's over. He looked at his hand, looked at the signet ring on his finger, the ring marking him as the Shahal, the ring that was his brother's for so many years. He remarks that he will never be forgiven for it, and he will never forgive himself for it. She tells him that he had to, and he knows that as well as she does, as well as anyone. War makes bastards of us all. She didn't expect him to twirl around, grab her shoulder, crazed look in his eyes, as he shouts that no, there is honor in war. There is no honor in this, raising the ring. War didn't make him do this. There is a demon, a devil in his blood, in Kabar's blood, in their father's blood, in his father's blood, in his son's one day, no doubt. His mother was right. Bumaros take and they ruin. They take and they ruin lives. His voice was strangled, pleading, as he says that there is no escaping this cursed dynasty. He is a prisoner to it, and she is a prisoner to it.
So, I mean, it makes me wonder, right? You know, we're almost at the end here, but with what he's just saying there, you know, I had posed a question at one point in time during some of these videos, or I don't remember if it was through the Fratricide part or with the Monoram itself, but the idea of, you know, the original Bumari, I always forget which one it's supposed to be, but, you know, when he was blessed, I guess, by Meccan and, you know, given the powers that he had and et cetera, right? Like, how much of Meccan's influence took over him as a person as well, right? Like, this demon that he's talking about that's in their blood, well, their blood's been passed down from the original Bumari, who, you know, obviously has been influenced by Meccan itself. And so is that demon just Meccan, you know, pushing them to do these things, elevating their greed? Is that what, you know, is that a part of Meccan, the want to take all of these things and make it their own? You know, is that kind of influence? It just makes me wonder if that is the case or not, or if it is just, you know, again, one of those darker sides of humanity where they have power, but it's not enough and they keep wanting more, you know?
She wrapped her fingers around his wrist, but said nothing, and he continued, saying that war doesn't turn them into bastards. This wretched empire does. Biliath brought up her other hand, supporting him as he sank into a chair. She spoke again, stating that it stands regardless, and as long as it stands, someone will lead it. It could have been Kabar, but it will be him, and he will rule with the finest of intentions. Ansul just replies that his father did as well. and then he didn't say anything for quite some time. Eventually, he tells Biliath that if he ever becomes like them, monsters, inhuman, rotten by that damned throne, he wants her to cut his throat in the night. This is the nature of this empire. No one will control him. He looked at her, golden gaze matching hers, and says that he needs her to swear it, or they'll leave right now, riding into the desert, and leave this corroding city behind. He needs her to swear that she has it in her to kill him, just as he killed Kabar, when the time comes. She hesitates, but swears, and her wing didn't twitch. He then says that he has no one left, with his father, Kabar, and Haram all gone. Biliath replies that he has her, and will always have her. He sagged into her
your mother
as
too,
the
dude.
two promised each other that they are theirs. She helped him to his feet, and Ansul Bumaro, sovereign of Amoni Ram, emperor of the Broken Empire, lord of the Fulad throne, opened the door.
Oh, okay. Well, it just straight up ends. Thought there was going to be a little more to it there. But all right. So yeah, there we go. That was chapter 4, the last part of Fratricide by the Exploring series. Links will be down below in the description, as always, to the Exploring series channel and to the red tape, or not red tape, to the what is the, no, this is red tape. I was thinking of admonition for some reason, and yeah, no, this is red tape. The red tape playlist, etc. So yeah, go over there, check out his channel. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like, and be sure to hit that sub button, show the man some love. Makes a lot of great content for the SCP universe and others, so check out all the stuff, and yeah, like I said, show him some love. Interesting. I mean, I was expecting the whole time for there to be more of a twist at the end here, but I mean, the story just kind of ended with just straightforward. I mean, the plot went off without a hitch, and you know, Ansul poisoned his brother, killed him, preventing a tyrant essentially from taking the throne. But you know, it's one of those things where you know, his father, Kabar's father, was abused. He had the same kind of scars as was indicated when Ansul was taking apart his life support systems essentially. And so, you know, Kabar was also abused, and so there's essentially a line of abuse going down. Who knows where it really started? Maybe it started with the first Bumari, whatever, or maybe one of, you know, somewhere down the line, one of them was just rotten and they took the throne, and yeah, you know, who knows? So maybe with Ansul here taking over, they can break that line of abuse, greed, etc., and actually have a ruler who deserves it. That being said, you know, it is, again, as he said, he's kind of trapped in that cycle of taking. His family just takes what they want. You know, even though he doesn't want the throne, he's had to take it. And he's killed his brother and essentially his father, you know, in order to, for the greater good, you know, serve his empire and his country, etc. But it's still, he killed his brother and his father. You know, even though his father essentially was really already dead, was on his deathbed, really wasn't anything left of him, you know. But yeah, I was expecting more of a twist at the end. As I thought, I didn't know if it was going to be a situation where the memory technology was going to take over, and they were going to find a way to perfect it so that maybe one of the past Bamaros could essentially take over his brother's consciousness, and they'll, you know, it'll still look like his brother, but it's not him, or, you know, something along those lines. I was expecting that to come in, but it could have just, you know, it could have just been, you know, I don't know what the proper term is. Just one of those misdirection things, you know, where the author kind of puts it in there as like a little key jangle or whatever to like, yeah, this could happen, or it's a way where it could go. And I think maybe that's kind of the point of the story. There are a lot of different little things put into the story where, you know, again, like the memory transfer thing, the whole situation where Biliath was kind of given away that she didn't actually care for Kabar anymore and was disloyal to him, but he never really caught on to it. You know, there were subtle little things for us as the viewer that we caught on to where, you know, it could have changed the story, but really didn't, and it just went off straightforward. They poisoned him, he died, and Unsul took the throne and became the emperor, you know? So I mean, I guess technically it sounds like they do end up having their happily ever after. I would assume that he ends up marrying Biliath and she becomes the empress, and they rule Amon Aram and take it to, you know, the point where we hear the story where it gets sieged by the Abominant and taken over by them eventually. So but really great story overall, really enjoyed it. So like I said, I will have I still need to put part 3 up on the channel, I believe, but by the time you see this, it'll already be up. So I will have all these parts put up individually, and then I will put them together as one really long video. I don't know what the length is going to be. It's probably going to be over 6 hours, because some of the videos, I think a couple of videos are 2 hours long. You know, this one's almost 2 hours long, so, and it's 4 parts, so it'll probably be close to 6 to maybe even 8 hours, somewhere in that timeline. So, and then we still got I think 5 more parts to finish up with, you know, getting into Black Adytum, the Sarkic side of things here, and Red Tape. So looking forward to getting into that, and we'll probably start getting into that towards the end of this week or next week. So thank you guys for watching, really appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, consider leaving a like and a sub, as it helps me and the channel grow, and it lets the YouTube algorithm gods know that you are looking forward to seeing more of this kind of content and you want to see some more. So you consider leaving a like and subs. It helps me and the channel grow. And if you'd like to join us when I do these reactions live with my YouTube members, there's a join button underneath the video, as well as a link in the description to the YouTube membership benefits and tiers that I have to offer. Hopefully soon I'll be expanding on some more stuff in there, adding some more things. So stay tuned and look forward, you know, to that. But regardless, if you want to take your sport to the next channel, that is the way to do it. Thank you guys. If you're still watching here to the very end, greatly appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day to do so. And yeah, I'll see you guys on the next one.